infectious. This isn't a consumer good.
Well, for his take now, let's bring in the federal opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, who joins us now from Sydney. Minister, thank you so much for being with us this morning on News Breakfast.
Good morning.
Good
morning. Thanks for having me on the program.
Welcome to the show. You have been pushing for free rapid antigen tests. We now have state and territory leaders giving concessional card holders these free tests for the next few months or so. What's your response to that? Is that enough?
Well, this is too little, and it, of course, is too late. The AMA was saying that we should prepare for this from last September, which is when the TGA granted approval. And what we have here is a federal government that once again has been caught being complacent, not putting in place the plans. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing Australians are anxious. They're concerned about the health of themselves and their families. They just want to do the right thing as they have been doing for 2 years. And the easiest and simplest way is to make free tests available for all, just like PCR tests are available and are free. But, of course, the reason why we've moved to rapid antigen tests is because of the failure to plan properly to stop those long queues that formed that caused such frustration around Australia.
I want to get to the planning in just a moment, but I want to point out the fact that earlier in the week you had been calling for subsidised antigen tests. Now you've changed your tune, and this is just after
at no stage did I do that.
Social services
at no
and
stage
other
did I do that.
Advocate groups have been calling for free tests. It's only now that you're calling for free tests as well.
Well, that's just not right. With respect, I know that some journalists have suggested that. The whole way along, I have said that tests should be available for people who need them and who want them, and that income shouldn't be a criteria for
and so
that.
What we have now is a plan to be able to provide these free tests for people who do need them and where income is not a problem, and low-income groups, vulnerable groups from within the disability community as well, pensioners as well. Anyone with a concessional card will be able to get free tests. Are you satisfied with that plan?
I'm absolutely not satisfied with that plan, and nor is the Australian Medical Association, nor are the people I speak to in the community.
Given that there's such a crunch in terms of supply, you would want to provide tests for all of Australia, given that there's such a shortage of supply?
The government says itself that they reckon that they've fixed supply. They say it's all coming online. And, of course, the issue of supply has been a real issue because the government failed to plan for supply. But they now say that the supply is coming online. The simplest way to deliver this is to make sure that everyone who wants a test can receive one. The simplest way as well is to do it through Medicare. It's just like we deliver other health services through Medicare, and we do so on a universal basis. That's the principle of Medicare. What we have here is small businesses crying out for their workers to be able to be tested. What we have here is businesses that aren't able to open because they can't get a workforce. And we have people now, as a result of the decisions made yesterday, people will test positive at home, not register in the numbers. That doesn't mean less people are getting COVID. What it means is that there's less transparency in the system, and it's not clear from government advice what they should do if they test positive at home.
I would just want to come back to the issue of supply. Now, you are calling for the Prime Minister to fix this supply issue. He did say for the next fortnight or so there will be a bit of a crunch. However, we have been assured that the supplies will be coming within the next fortnight. Now, I just want to take you back to July of last year when we were all talking about the pandemic roadmap, and Labor got on board and joined the chorus to get the nation vaccinated. There was a huge call from yourself, from the Labor Party as well.
We didn't get on board. With respect,
vaccinated. But Labor did not stress the need to ensure that there is a supply or adequate supply for rapid antigen tests after the pandemic or following the nation having been mostly vaccinated. Labor did not call for that either.
With respect, that is complete nonsense. More than a year ago, we were talking about, this time if you go back to at the end of 2020, we were talking about make sure you fix up the supply of the vaccines. That's the first thing we were saying. We were calling upon the government to do deals with more companies for more vaccines to be available. The government was complacent. Pfizer approached them and they got fobbed off. So we had a delay in the delivery of the vaccines. This time last year, in the first week of January, the Prime Minister essentially started with his "it's not a race." For the entire year, we said it was a race. Then, throughout that year, we also called for preparation for the next phase, which is preparation in terms of boosters. If people had have received the vaccines earlier, they would have received the boosters earlier. They would have also received, of course, boosters earlier if they had shortened the time between the second dose and the booster, which is something that Labor also called for. If you had fixed the supply of the vaccine, we would have had boosters earlier, we would have had people protected more. The reason why we have moved from rapid antigen tests, PCR tests to rapid antigen tests as the go-to test is because the government wasn't able to deliver on the capacity for people who were getting PCR tests. That is why that has occurred. And this is, at each stage, this has been a failure by the government to secure supply, to make sure they planned in advance, and Labor at each and every stage, whether it was wage subsidies, whether it was purpose-built quarantine, whether it was securing supply of the vaccine, whether it was securing supply of the booster shots, whether it was decreasing the gap between the second stage and the booster shot. At each and every stage, Labor has called for action prior to the government taking it, because the government has always been, not as the Prime Minister says, shake and bake. The Prime Minister is more likely to be characterised by set and forget. He says it's all okay, everything's cool, you're going to be back, it'll be back to normal by Christmas. Well, we've seen the consequences played out for Australian families, and most importantly, the consequences for those heroes in the health sector who are continuing to work hard under extraordinary physical and emotional pressure. The pressure on their mental health, they're exhausted. And one of the reasons why they're exhausted is because of this government's failure to plan ahead and to always be playing catch-up.
I want to now take you to Labor's plan to beat COVID-19, and I'm getting this off your website, Minister, that I checked this morning. Your official website says this is Labor's plan to beat COVID-19. 1, fix the vaccine rollout. 2, build dedicated quarantine facilities across the country. 3, have an effective public information campaign. 4, start making mRNA vaccines in Australia. Nowhere in there have you mentioned ensuring that there is adequate supply for rapid antigen tests. And also, this is a test that doesn't seem to be moving with a variant that's actually evolving across such short months.
Well, with respect, what you haven't told your listeners and you've ignored is the fact that that was the plan that we put out a year ago. In the first half of 2020, we were talking about the 4 priorities being roll out of the vaccine, get the first and the second dose. At that stage, no one had been vaccinated. The government was failing to vaccinate people, and it was too slow. The second point, purpose-built quarantine, still hasn't happened. The third point, a public information campaign. The government itself, as of June last year, was still saying they couldn't have a public information campaign because they didn't have the supply of the vaccines if people came forward. And the fourth, of course, manufacture mRNA vaccines. That's something that, according to the government's own industry minister two ago, said would be manufactured in Australia by now, many months ago, that would be happening at the end of 2021. So the plan that you've spoken about shows the fact that we were calling well in advance. That's from the first half of 2021. It's something that we continued to put forward. We were constructive. We put forward practical ideas. The government failed to deliver on those. If they had, when we were calling for that at the beginning of 2021, if they'd have called fixed supply that we were calling for in 2020, way back, if they'd have built purpose-built quarantine, which they still haven't done in a single location funded by the federal government up to now, more than 2 years into the pandemic. If they'd had an effective public information campaign earlier, that would have been a good thing. And if we were producing mRNA vaccines here, in terms of which now, of course, could have been the booster shots, that would have made a difference as well. So in terms of the production of mRNA vaccines, that would have fixed some of the booster problems. People weren't talking about rapid antigen tests at the beginning of last year. That's true, because no one was giving rapid antigen tests anywhere in the world at the beginning of last year. And with due respect, that's something that we couldn't have anticipated. But at the time, if you look back, our record and our suggestions to the government stand the test of time and are evidence of the constructive role that we have played. And in addition to that, you might have added the economic support that we were arguing for at that time as well, which included, of course, our support for wage subsidies through JobKeeper, which at the time Scott Morrison characterised as a dangerous idea.
Right. Anthony Albanese, opposition leader, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me on the program.